Hey guys, welcome to an episode of Silent Oak. I want to create timelines of my research. The information is so immense and overwhelming that, well, it's not overwhelming, it's just a lot. And I want to create timelines of my research so that I can look back to and just kind of see what I've learned and be able to just easily add to it as I go, because there's just so much. More you learn, less you know, is just truly the thing. And I think what I'll do is I'll just go over a timeline, and also just second half of the episode I'll just talk about what I think all that means to me today, as far as the Bible, Christianity, faith, and I think it just changes daily. It will probably continuously just change daily, and because it is a complex topic, right? It's somehow is not just an idea that we're discussing. It has become so many people's identities, and it's a culture, it's an ideology, it's a belief system, it's history. It's just so many things have happened around it that it just creates a complexity. And then of course it should be spirituality, which as you could see, I kept it last or almost overlooked it, is because at this point in time I'll tell you what I think of where I'm at. But let's just really quickly go over timelines. And what I want to do with that is, there's too much, so I probably will not go through all of it. But because Abrahamic religions, all of them started from Abraham, started from Judaism, I want to just go back in time, like just go all the way back to Judaism and the compilation of Old Testament, and then come to Jesus in the New Testament, just some of the key moments that what has happened in time there, and then try to be as brief as I can with the crazy long history, obviously. And then I likely will not manage to get to Islam on this episode, but I think it is going to be a very interesting one to also attach this third cousin Islam that also piled up on top of religion stemming out of Judaism, and see where we go with that. Let's just go all the way back to first, I guess, formation of Judaism. In the ancient times, most people were pagans, or they believed in multiple deities. In Jewish case, there were many gods, and among them there was Baal and Asherah. They're pagan gods. But at some point, they switched to monotheism. You probably have heard this phrase saying the lost tribes. So what happened there is there's 12 tribes of Israelites. And at this point, they are, in the ancient times, it's called the period of the judges. So they were just tribal confederation. It was not, they didn't have a kingdom or a king. And the people demanded for a king because of insecurities, especially due to Philistine threats. The people wanted a central authority like other nations. Same time, so during that time, the Philistines were organized around 5 main city-states: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron. And each city ruled by a lord, all united in the matters of military and religion. So basically, Philistines were well organized in their missions, and the 12 tribes of Israel, they felt like they needed a king. And in 1050 BCE, before century, Israel was formed, led by Saul as the king. After Saul, David succeeds Saul, and he becomes the king everybody probably knows about, the house of David. So David is elected. He's not Saul's son. Then Solomon, who's David's son, succeeds David when David dies. Solomon is the one that built the first temple in Jerusalem. So going forward, after Solomon dies, his son takes over. He's not as good of a ruler, and the 10 tribes split. So Israel splits into northern Israel and south, the house of David, which was called Judah. Judah was, the capital of Judah was Jerusalem. And this is why they say lost tribes of Israel, because then that northern Israel falls in 722 BCE to Assyria. And now they have the house of David, which is only 2 tribes. I think it's Benjamin and, I don't remember the other name. Israel then falls, okay. About 124 years later, Judah also falls to Babylon. 586 BCE, Judah falls to Babylon, and the temple Solomon built, the first temple, it was destroyed. So then karma, pretty quickly after, Babylon is taken by Cyrus the Great, the Persian Empire. Now, Zerubbabel, I hope I'm saying that name right, is a descendant of David. He establishes connections with Cyrus the Great, and Cyrus the Great invites Jews back, and they built the second temple. During this period, from 700 BCE to 500 BCE, this is when the Old Testament gets compiled, during these 200 years. And this is when Judaism, or Jews, move from the pagan multiple deities into a monotheism. Yahweh becomes the God. So now there's one God. And if I have to speculate, I'm going to, it's probably to create an identity. They compiled all the mythologies from the regions, and they just really needed, I guess, a framework to be able to preserve their identity, because now they don't have any states. Both of them have fallen. And to preserve their identity, they're coming up with something that's different from others, which is the monotheism. Now they created their own particular God that they worship, and not just the same gods that everybody else worshipped, even though every god, like let's say if for Greeks it was Zeus, for them maybe it was Baal, for somebody else it was Mitros, and I may butcher these names, but anyway, the pagan gods were ultimately the same with different names depending on the culture. And like for Armenians, I think it was Armazd. All right. So then during this time, they create the Old Testament. There was a person named Ezra and Nehemiah, 5th century BCE. Basically, he reforms Jewish religious life, rebuilds walls of Jerusalem, reinforces Torah law. He made Torah the foundation of Jewish life, like a national constitution, publicly read the Torah to restore knowledge after exile, set up courts and judges to enforce Torah law, merging religious and civil law, ordered Jewish men to divorce foreign wives to preserve ethnic religious purity. So this man basically did a lot right there around around 400 BCE time frame, 5th century. And it is an interesting one because clearly it's a period where they're rebuilding Jerusalem, even though it doesn't belong to them. They're creating walls around it. Absolute preservation mode to restore kingdom is what that seems like to me. I actually used to think that Islam perhaps was responsible for creating this interesting intertwined thing where you can't really distinguish the law from the ethnicity from the person, but technically it looks like actually it was already there, and then when Islam was stamped out of Judaism, it just kind of kept that part and just became more and more radical. So that's very interesting. Okay. So now we know that there is important stuff such as creating the Old Testament and moving towards monotheism. Fast forward, is there anything very important that I don't want to miss? There is insane amount of revolts, but we're not going to go into Jewish history. I do think it's, of course, important because it all relates to one another, and it all later relates to how Christianity emerges, what it becomes, how Islam emerges, what it is. But we'll just keep going forward. Now, during this time, there are some key Jewish groups. Pharisees, which is interesting. In the Christian Bible, in the Christian New Testament, Pharisees are described as a negative thing, but they were, in the Judaism, they emphasized oral law, synagogue worship, resurrection, and mind, this is not, so Jesus is not here yet. All right, a couple of points that I haven't put in here that I should have is when, like right around 1st to 2nd century, so before in this time scale here, right at the beginning of the century, the Hebrew Bible, through Hebrew scholars, gets translated into Greek, because this is a Hellenized era. Everybody's just speaking Greek, and it gets translated into Greek very meticulously, very carefully by Hebrew scholars, and it's called the Septuagint, and that is the oldest translation of the Hebrew Bible. Now, what's interesting there, why am I mentioning that? Because there's today we have the Bibles that are based off of Septuagint, and then there are Bibles who are based off of the Masoretic texts. Like the Protestant Bible is based off of Masoretic texts. Apparently King James Version that I've been reading is based off Masoretic text. However, I do have the Armenian Bible, which is based off of Septuagint and their own thing. Then the Ge'ez Bible, the Ethiopian Bible, which is based on Septuagint. And I don't have the Catholic Bible, but that's also based on Septuagint. And then Masoretic text, what is that? After Jesus came and left, came and died, the Masoretes in 7th to 10th century decided to retranslate the Bible. And during this time, they made some changes. And if you really put it side by side, I think I have it here. So if you put them side by side, it becomes very interesting, because speculation, to me, it looks like because most of the Jews rejected Jesus as the Messiah, they then needed to change some things to take away that messianic matching that was happening. In the Psalms, for example, the Septuagint was saying, "They have pierced my hands and my feet." Now, Masoretic text turned into, "Like a lion are my hands and my feet." So that's very interesting, right? Because obviously Jesus was crucified. So according to their earlier translation, Jesus would have fit this description. And then now the new translation, he doesn't fit that description. Okay, where there was an interesting one. According to the number of angels of God, according to the number of sons of Israel. That's another thing. So Septuagint was saying according to the number of the angels of God. In Deuteronomy 32:8, Septuagint says according to the number of the angels of God. Whereas now it has turned into according to the number of sons of Israel. This is what I meant in my, I don't know how many episodes ago, where I say just sometimes powerful enough people would come in and course correct the narrative. So Genesis 10, Table of Nations, Septuagint is saying 72 nations, Masoretic text 70 nations. I actually had not honed in on this before. Now that I'm seeing this first, like just clicking it, I need to know what are the two nations that are missing all of a sudden. And then another one was virgin. So Septuagint would say virgin shall conceive, and the new text that they retranslated it says young woman shall conceive. Basically, as you can see, there's a course correction happening because Jesus was rejected, and then now they're like, okay, that sounds awfully like he was the Messiah, so we're going to, that's what it sounds like to me. We're going to just, turn around and course correct here because we don't want him as the Messiah, which is ironic if you really think about it. Today they have Israel after their last Messiah, which was Jesus. They were hoping for a military leader to restore Israel, but technically, if you think about it, Israel is restored. And why? Because of Christians. So, very, very interesting. Stay tuned for hearing what I think about faith as of now when it comes to Christianity, because it is so complex. Because I can say so many sentences that all are true to me, that all will sound contradictory because of the complexity of the situation. So anyway, so let's go back to the timeline for a second. First century Septuagint comes about. It's the Bible everybody uses. And then key Jewish groups, the Old Testament Bible everybody uses. The key Jewish group at the time, Pharisees, emphasized oral law, synagogue worship, resurrection, purity, popular with the people. So they're popular with the people. So this is the same people Jesus keeps cursing out. Sadducees, I'm probably butchering these names. Priestly elites. Priestly elites are also those who compiled the Old Testament. Controlled the temple. So they controlled the temple. Essenes, they were separatists who rejected the temple priesthood as corrupt. They likely are responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls. And for those who don't know, Dead Sea Scrolls are what was found in 1947, I want to say, 45, that just basically had a lot of writings that was confirming many different ancient texts, basically. The Zealots, they were revolutionary nationalists who wanted to overthrow Roman rule. And then there were the common Jews. Many were poor, rural, undertaxed, and underrepresented, had deep hope for messianic deliverance. Now, the messianic deliverance is going to come about every single, like a lot in Jewish history. Apparently, like, when I read, it almost sounds like they were constantly every day hoping for that Messiah, and everything just was just like, okay, it's now, is this it? It just feels like that. Maybe it wasn't like that because we're compressing so many years of history into a quick scan through, but there's definitely every revolt had to do with pretty much believing that this is it, this is the moment. All right, so during this time, this is where Jesus comes. Here comes Jesus, okay? And he is here preaching love and love your neighbor. Don't be eye for an eye. It's turn the other cheek. It's God is within you. And it is very fascinating as to, and Jews were like, nope, that sounds ridiculous. And they just, get him killed, crucified. But let's just stay in this zone for a second. What Jesus is doing is he's directly opposing the Old Testament God, even though he says, I have not come to abolish the law, I have come to fulfill it. But he does continuously say a lot of the opposite of what was going on. He did have a problem with the corruption that was taking place, or what he was perceiving as corruption based on those groups that I just mentioned. But it also appears that he came to reform Judaism. So he definitely wasn't trying to create a new religion or a new movement. He thought he's coming to reform Judaism, potentially a Messiah. He saw himself as a Messiah that was going to help heal wounds, perhaps, or restore. Like, I think he said something like, my body is the temple, as in, he really wanted that unity and that animosity and the revolts and everything to stop. Sounds like, I'm speculating based on what I've read. And that's why his message was all about love and peace. And a lot of his philosophy was actually quite wonderful. The philosophy was similar to Buddhism, for example, when it comes to God is within you, how to master yourself, your emotions, how to live a righteous life, how to not attach to material good. I think that's the biggest Buddhist thing, right? Just don't be attached to material good. Detach. and God is within you. And then there was a lot of Hinduism ideology. There was Taoism. There was Stoicism. Basically, a lot of really good ideologies that were actually prominent at the time. Stoicism, for example, was a very prominent ideology during that time, during Hellenized Roman Empire. And he just had a very different message of what he was trying to accomplish with Judaism. But he was rejected. So I think a couple of quotes that is good to read is this. Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. This is Mark 7:6. I am going to say that I give Mark as the gospel the biggest importance, because Mark is the earliest gospel that ever written. When I knew nothing about the Bible, I really was under the impression, and the reason why this is so confirmed, or so many people believe in this, is because all these people came and separately told apparently the same story, right? So basically, you're just reading 4 gospels from Mark, Matthew, John, and Luke, and you're like, oh my God, look at that. They're all saying the same story, so it must be true. That's not what happened. Mark is the earliest writer of the Gospels. He's not the earliest writer of the book. We'll get to Paul, which is single-handedly probably responsible for Christianity being formed. But let's stick to Mark for a second. He writes the book in 60 to 65 CE, so Common Era. And that's about 30 years or so after Jesus' death. Mark is the only one believed to have direct records of Jesus, because he was Peter's secretary. So whether that's 100% or not, hard to tell. But let's say Mark is believed to be Peter's secretary, and he, at least while he didn't walk with Jesus, he is holding information, right? He's his secretary, so he knows about Jesus. He has access to Peter's notes, or he maybe takes notes for Peter, whatever the secretary means. So then Mark writes the gospel, and the Gospel of Mark ends at 16:8. So there's absolutely nothing about resurrection in Gospel of Mark. Why, to me, this becomes the only gospel that has any legitimacy is because Matthew and everybody else just took Mark's gospel and just kind of put their twist to it. And they came like I don't know, like 70, 80 years later, right? They were not from the same time period. Definitely not someone who could have possibly known Jesus in the same lifetime. And so their writings becomes less important to me personally, right? Obviously, the church system establishment has accepted them as legit and truthful, but none of these people walked with Jesus. They didn't know Jesus, and they're just writing stuff. Matthew sounds extremely, extremely Jewish. Luke is a Gentile, and Mark is a Hellenized Jew, a very kind of leveled type of. It's the least emotional, I guess, of the Gospels, I would say, I think, in my opinion. All right, so that was from Mark. So he's basically talking about the fact that people are saying things like leaders emphasized rules and rituals but ignored mercy, justice, and inner transformation. He attacked their obsession with external purity laws while ignoring the heart. The external purity laws are just basically all the insane little rituals people do, thinking this is the answer to things, right? Like what you get to eat, what you can and cannot do. For example, purity laws were surrounding a woman who's menstruating. She's impure, so for her to be able to step into a synagogue, she has to shower, then wait 7 days before she becomes pure. If you've touched a dead corpse, like God forbid you've lost someone and you held the dead corpse, now you're considered impure. Not only you just suffered the heartache, now you're impure. You have to shower, get cleansed, wait 7 days, and some special water gets sprinkled on you or something, and then you're pure all of a sudden. basically all these rituals, like eating pork, you have to wait before you're pure and all this stuff, right? So Jesus was like, okay, this is ridiculous. He's like, you're obsessing over these purities and rituals, but your hearts are just dark. Basically, you're not focusing on justice, right, mercy, and righteousness and inner transformation. And of course, the Old Testament book is known to be a lot more harsh, right? Like eye for an eye. There's a lot of quotes in books that I haven't read, but I know it's there because I've referenced them, that are quite violent. I was under the impression that Islam is the only religion who tells people to just go and kill other people, but the Old Testament does this a little bit too. A little bit more poetic, a little bit more less aggressive, in a sense that the quote itself is as aggressive, but the difference is that the Quran just doesn't stop repeating it over and over, whereas the other one just kind of says and passes on. That doesn't make it, one way or the other, but the other one is just sips into your head. I lost the train of my thought a little bit, but I think I was talking about Jesus being upset with them, and basically trying to call for less violence, more acceptance of this new framework that they live in, I guess, what it really sounds like to me. Because the amount of revolts that were happening, in one hand, it's very understandable, right? You lost your states, now another empire came and took it. You didn't lose it to that empire. Another empire has collapsed it. Now those empires don't even exist anymore themselves. Another empire has now taken over, and then another empire has taken over. So now you're just like third generation already, like, so many powers have changed, but you just constantly fighting for your land. That's very understandable. But I guess one thing that comes across is sometimes the revolts were justified, like people would feel like they're oppressed and they're being taxed heavily, and they would revolt because of that. Sometimes they would really have a reason, like their temple maybe got disrespected, or the name changed or renovated or something. I think it's in here. And then they would have a bigger, or like there was a point where Rome made circumcision illegal, and he was just trying to really integrate Jews rather than letting them stick to that kind of clan tribal situation. And they revolted again because they want to keep and preserve their identity. So all that is understandable, but there's also been revolts where Jews just went and slaughtered and massacred the civilians to kind of make a point. And then they got massacred right in return. And I think that was one of the big wars that completely exiled Jews out of that, Judea completely. And Rome was like, that's it. Like, I'm just going to rename this place. You're not even going to have reference to the same name. And called it Palestina, which is, they brought it back from the Philistines. Philistines were their ancient rivals. Now they kind of, just to put a cherry on top, like to, I guess, smash the sword even harder, they just called it Palestina and attached it to Syria, and so that Jews can start detaching, I guess, or it just disconnects their identity from the land and the name. I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, but I do want to go back to some of these quotes from Jesus. So he was addressing the temple corruption. You made it a den of thieves. He overturns the cash register, and it's like, what is this going on? You're like charging people money. Exclusion of the poor and sinful. Jesus ate with tax collectors, prostitutes, and the ritual immature. People shunned by the establishment. He emphasized compassion over purity laws. There's nothing outside a person that can defile them by going into them. Rather, it is what comes out that defiles. So in Mark 17, that's what Jesus said. It's basically, I think in Matthew, he says the same thing in a different way, which Matthew is also Jewish, and he took his own turn and a lot more emotionally charged against these Pharisees. I'm going to be like, you tell him, Matthew, let's see what your thoughts are, even though I put Mark first because that's where I think that's where all the main sources, the more data points come from Mark. But essentially he's saying, it doesn't matter what, goes into your body. It matters what comes out of you. So it doesn't matter that you eat pork or do this or do that. It's like what's in your heart that matters. So Matthew, and then rejection of nationalism and violence. He refused to lead a political revolt against Rome. He disappointed the Zealots, which was the nationalist group. He was preaching, of course, enemy, love, and peace. So definitely the Zealots could not stand him. Matthew, there's a section of Matthew just going, woe to you, and just shredding some of these people. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in the people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you, he's pissed. You tithe, mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. So he's basically just taking what Mark wrote, and he was just like, this is not radical enough. This doesn't curse them out enough. Let's just, I'm not judging. He's angry. I can tell he's angry. And it is fine to be angry because those people were apparently corrupt. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. Oh boy. Woe to you, scribes, for you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. And the seventh woe, there's seven woes. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous. You are the sons of those who murdered the prophets. And of course, he's pissed they killed Jesus on that one. Okay. So, where we are, so Jesus has 12 disciples. Another important thing is there are gospels that have this, just the church system has decided that they're not good enough, like they're not legit enough. But Gospel of Gospel of Thomas is actually a very old gospel, potentially far older than any of these gospels. And Thomas and Philip were part of the 12 disciples. So now the church fathers have decided that, well, we don't know if that's the real Thomas and the real Philip, but somehow we just take John and Matthew, and it is a little bit logically inconsistent for me. Why they've decided this doesn't go in there. I mean, I have ideas why they decided, but I'll tell you on the second half of the video. So anyway, they've decided that this doesn't fit. Gospel of Thomas and Philip and Mary Magdalene, they're a lot more spiritual. They're a lot more just about the teaching. There's absolutely nothing about a resurrection. This is the part where it just blows my mind. I think I'm entering the other territory. Okay. So yeah, this kind of crosses over to seeing where I'm at with my, let's call it the belief, right? Because this part of history crosses over to that section. Whew. There's James the Just. He's Jesus' brother. And then there's this 12 disciples. Among them are Thomas and Philip, who have written Gospels, who is not part of the canon. And then there's all these early Christians, the Ebionites, Arians, there's the Gnostics. So there's all these groups. None of the people who walked with Jesus believed that Jesus was God himself. Okay? So this is quite important to me. Nobody that walked with Jesus believed that he was God himself, believed that he resurrected. They just thought he is a Messiah with incredibly valuable teachings and philosophy. And he is here to fulfill the prophecies that was, spiritually written and taught. They literally got suppressed and slowly died off because they didn't believe in Jesus, in Trinity. And Trinity is what just the Catholic Church brought forward. So here we're going to go into Paul. Paul single-handedly rebranded Christianity and spread it around. Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad, because if I look at Christianity today, I am happy it exists. It is net positive. Just like everything else, there's a lot you can criticize, but when we see the absence of a good ideology, it's just not a pretty picture. People can become nihilistic, they can become depressed, and when you're in that state, and if you have a lazy mind or a weak mind, then new ideologies can take a hold. So you can become someone who's easy to exploit, right? Because majority of people need something to believe in. They need a purpose. They need an authority. That's the part that I don't relate to. I don't understand, why are people like this? Why do we need authority? I grew up absolutely rejecting authority my entire life. I never liked my parents' authority. I never liked any teacher's authority. I never liked any boss or whatever telling me what I can. My authority was, if it makes logical sense, I agree, and I have no problem to comply. If it doesn't make logical sense, absolutely not going to comply. It is just that. So, there's great philosophies that are so useful to humans, like the Buddhism, like Stoicism, that would create a strong individual. But what I'm researching, and I realize the library of Buddhist books, that's something I'm probably never gonna read in my life. Holy crap. But anyway, jumping back to this topic, I never understood authority, but I do recognize that majority of people do need authority. I see people all the time that they just cannot find the moral compass on their own unless they have it. Now, it's easy for me to say that because I did grow up rejecting authority, but I also thankfully have the moral compass of Christianity instilled in me, because that's the culture I grew up with. So now, because of that, obviously I think Christianity is the right moral compass, because it teaches love and peace and harmony, kindness, and so on. Absence of that has broken families, has created the upheaval that U.S. has seen in the last decade, the crazy division, people that have completely lost their mind on certain ideologies that makes absolutely no sense, people that are finding problems to solve, so they're creating problems so that they can solve it. And I think this is where I think Christianity is good, and I'm happy it exists. But at the same time, it is really bizarre for me to learn that Paul single-handedly is responsible for Christianity's existence. It's not Jesus. Jesus was trying to reform Judaism. He was not trying to create Christianity. Jesus was all about reforming his own people so that they are less radical, more accepting, less tribal, and they killed him. Okay? Paul had never met Jesus. He was just a guy claiming visions. And he was a guy who was very busy writing a lot of letters. And those letters became foundation to spreading Christianity. And what he was basically saying is, James was still very Jewish. He actually was way more Jewish than Jesus was. Jesus was trying to teach perfect balance, because when you read the gospel, you can see that he's not saying don't do all of those things, but he's saying the law is made for men, not men for the law. So basically, if it's Sabbath and somebody needs help, you're not going to just look at them and watch them die because it's Sabbath, you can't help them. No, you go freaking help the person. You'll do your Sabbath later, So he was trying to teach balance, including around what to eat, what not to eat. He was like, it's just really not that important. You just want to be good inside, strive to be righteous, love your enemies, be kind and giving. So it's just a great philosophy. James was far more radical when it comes to the Torah practice and upholding to the law. However, all of the early Christians and the disciples, none of them believed or focused on the resurrection. This becomes the entire argument and the bloodshed of Catholic Church. Now, it's important. The Ebionites and the Gnostics, who held very different understanding of spirituality, they were not fighting each other. The Arians and so none of these groups were fighting each other. It was just the Roman Catholic Church that was fighting everybody. Then they decided which books are good, which books are not. A lot of the Gospels, like Gospel of Thomas, Philip, Mary Magdalene, they just completely fell off. And a lot of these Gospels are far more aligned with what Jesus was teaching himself than anything else. Because what the Christianity ended up being about is believe that Jesus rose and died for your sins and resurrected. Believe Jesus was God himself, and that's how you will be saved. James, Jesus' brother, was like, nope. You have to practice to be righteous and merciful and this and that. Now then, here's where it gets really murky, because Paul is remembered, when you do any kind of research, what sticks out from Paul is that he's saying salvation alone is by believing in that Jesus was God, resurrection. Which obviously sounds absurd to its face, right? No, salvation should not just be about believing that Jesus was God. It should be about your inner transformation, like Jesus was saying. He goes around constantly talking about how somebody says, you're good. He says, why do you call me good? I'm not good. Only God is good, right? He says things like God is within you. So then we go around and say, actually, if you don't worship Jesus as God, then you're going to die in hell. What? So I think Roman Empire basically steps in and exploits Christianity. And why would they do that? This is where it gets interesting for me to speculate various ideas. If you think about pagan times, right? I'm speculating. If you think about the pagan times, they believed in all sorts of deities. And among those deities, it was very easy for emperors, pharaohs, and kings to become a worshipped idol themselves. They were an utmost authority, and they almost basically were delivering the message, right? They were the chosen ones. They were the intermediary between God and peasants. So that served really well for them, because obviously who doesn't like to be worshipped? And then all of a sudden they start losing control over people, because they're like, all right, this people are starting to have all sorts of ideas that they can be their own authority. There's all these revolts happening with Jews. At first, Roman Empire couldn't really tell the difference between the revolts coming from Jews versus Christianity. And the crazy thing is, at some point, they just decided, okay, like I can see some clear distinction, and I'm going to pull that distinction even far more apart and make sure that this doesn't turn into whatever the heck is going on, because obviously Jews were constantly revolting. And I think this is where my co-host Bobby said something very, very wise. He said, what better way to control people than to control the God they worship? And this is very key, because this is true. Here you are, you've lost your status as an idol, because people all of a sudden are not believing in, they're mostly starting to move towards monotheism and not the pagan system, even though there were still a lot of pagans. Now you're losing your control, your power in some ways, not totally, obviously, you're still the dominating empire, but you're seeing people doing this entire revolt thing happening. You're going to step in and make sure you seize control. And I think that's precisely what the Catholic Church did. I think the Catholic Church hijacked the movement and rebranded it into a manageable, scalable ideology to be able to control people. And that starts by saying, no, we're going to tell you what you believe in. God forbid you read Jesus' words and figure out for yourself. Now, needless to say, I hope I don't have to say that this doesn't mean every Christian following Christian faith is just completely incapable of just extracting the wisdom from the Gospels. That's not what this means. But I'm talking about the ideology and the history of the ideology. It is hard to decide for me what's right? One thing I can't do is I cannot say Jesus is God, because he clearly is saying that I'm not. He's saying that he came to fulfill some prophecies, and technically what that means is he's going to, he wants to pass on this incredible philosophy for people to find peace and spirituality and calmness within. Now, for example, like if I take different cultures that I've visited, I will not go to, let's say, I will not talk to a Greek person and they're going to say anything about me being not the right type of Christian. That doesn't exist, right? We all are practicing the moral values of Christianity. It's embedded in our nature. We don't even think about the rules and rituals, which to Paul's credit, I think that's what he was necessarily trying to do. It's possible that while Paul was saying, no, you still got to be righteous, but it's not about rules and regulations, he still maybe himself just misspoke, just got too stuck on that point of resurrection where the church was able to exploit. I don't know. But right now, Paul doesn't look like a genuine guy to me, basically. But let's go back. So if I talk to a Greek person, that doesn't come up. If I talk to an Italian person, that none of that comes up. Where Christianity starts splitting into this like I'm better than you type of thing, it really just happens a lot in the US, in my experience. So I would imagine similar in the West, but US for sure. And I have talked to people who, they ask like, oh, what's your faith? And I'll say I'm Christian. And they'll be like, oh, okay, so you believe in, and they'll recite something. Like oftentimes I think it's like the God, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and blah, 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 and the resurrection. And I'm like, I don't like repeating after, right? I don't like someone to tell me, repeat after me, and then I repeat. So I'm going to reject that premise. I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, because no, I actually don't. And then they'll be like, oh, okay, so you're not Christian. So in the West, what Christianity has become is either you repeat these words or you're not Christian, which of course comes from Roman Catholics because that's what the Roman Empire set forth during their Council of Nicaea, during the Council of Chalcedon. They just held all these councils to determine that who's right and who's wrong and what is the correct God to believe in. And that God became God, Jesus Christ, and Holy Spirit all in one, same thing. Yeah, I have a problem with that. And then James gets killed. He gets stoned to death. And then the temple gets destroyed in 70 AD. And then just Christianity starts separating from Judaism and slowly just really becoming a completely different thing. Where, do I think if Christianity wasn't hijacked by Paul to be spread and popularized, what do I think would happen? Most likely, if I create a mental simulation, most likely Christianity wouldn't exist. Most likely it would be a attempted reform of Judaism, and then it would die out. And as to where would we be as humans, that would be very hard to say because it's been 2000 years. So would it still be paganism? Would one other religion would just raise its head? Would maybe Islam be more successful than at conquering than they have been, even though they've been very successful? I don't know where we would be. This is why it becomes very interesting and challenging to decide what's the right thing. But none of this, of course, is spirituality, right? Because we're talking about, do we believe in the narrative that we've been fed, or do we not? But it really doesn't have to be that way either. I think we can absolutely value the moral compass that Christianity has, which is what Jesus was teaching, and accept the commonalities with many other incredible theologies and philosophies, and just not start picking each other apart as to, I'm spiritual, I'm agnostic, I'm an atheist, all because they're rejecting. Like, usually it's the skeptics that are rejecting this premise of authority. They're not rejecting the authority of God, right? Most people, there's so many people I talk to that they absolutely are highly spiritual people. What they're rejecting is the God that the Roman Empire or the Catholic Church has set forth and turned into a belief system that says, no, this is the God. This is the God you believe in. If you don't repeat that this is the God you believe in, then you're not faithful. But some of the most faithful people appear to be people who are highly, highly spiritual without reciting that Jesus is God. That, again, doesn't take away from Jesus in any way, in my opinion, because I do think he was an exceptionally interesting human being, very, very well balanced, very educated, unlike Muhammad, who came later. I have to do a whole thing on Islam since that was a sore spot with my last debates. I think I have some notes that I wrote down. I'm going to actually just read them because as I just was tossing up different ideas, I did write down a couple of notes that I think maybe is worthwhile reading. I said, in the West, there's a clear divide. Some people have genuinely internalized and live out the teachings of Jesus. They embody compassion, courage, and moral clarity. And then there are those who only absorb the institutional or cultural version of Christianity, which often just produces blind obedience to authority, not critical thought or real conviction. One group follows truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The other follows orders, even when they know better. You can usually tell who's who by observing who's intellectually honest and who's not. I wrote this because, as I was saying earlier, obviously not all Christians fall into the category of just blind following. And, there's so much that has happened in history, like the Scofield Bible, for example. Like, Protestants predominantly have really, really believed in this new Bible that was commissioned by the Rothschilds, allegedly. And it just created this Zionist movement, which, if you think about it, Jews rejected Jesus as the Messiah, but if you think about it, Jesus technically restored Israel because byproduct, a religion was formed, Christianity, who then over time was hijacked by multiple different bad actors, and then yet again hijacked by the Zionists, who then created a Bible and made a bunch of Christians in the most powerful empire, which is the US, to believe that Jews are the chosen ones and Israel must be restored. So technically, there you go. Jews should all of a sudden accept Jesus now. But anyway, in all seriousness, so that's something I wrote because there's so much propaganda in faith, and it didn't start yesterday either. Scofield Bible, of course, was 1909. That's when Oxford published it, and that's about, obviously more than 100 years ago. And then, but through time, so many, like the Masoretic text, for example, so many shifts have happened where people just constantly were fine-tuned where to go and what to believe in. And I personally have a little bit of a problem with it, because I think there's beauty in, there's strength in actually just practicing what was being preached. That's it. And that's what this next note is about that I wrote. There's no reason we can't believe in God in our own way without needing to subscribe to the institutionalized version of Christianity. Perhaps Jesus was teaching that same divine connection to spirituality as Buddhists, Gnostics, and many others also believed in. I'm saying perhaps, but I hardcore believe that. After all, to kill something, you divide it and conquer it. And what we're doing as Christians, rather than stripping Jesus' teachings down to their moral essence to clear our minds of pollution, hate, ego, and constant comparison, we're falling right in line with that division. We're tearing each other apart over semantics. Who's smarter? Who understands Jesus better? Who's more godly? Ironically, that seems like the kind of thing that would send us straight to hell. It shouldn't matter how people believe as long as the moral core is honored, whether there are angels or no angels, whether God looks like us or is pure energy, whether Jesus is one nature, two natured, or just a great teacher. It's all noise. A distraction from the real point, which is to strive towards righteousness. Just honor your word, treat others the way you want to be treated. Don't be a slave to your vices or external temptations. Free yourself from that kind of control. Let go of the ego, the need to be special, to feel unique against others. Be unique against yourself. Challenge yourself to improve, not to compete, but to grow. Seek balance through discipline so you can be free from rigid rules. That's what I wrote, and that's what I hardcore believe in, honestly. Right now, I doubt I will come to a point where somehow I change my mind on Christ. But I also, as I start saying in the beginning, I do think there's so many things that are true at the same time. Jesus represents truth. He stood up to authority, to corruption. He knew that he was constantly misunderstood, and those who did understand him got suppressed. And while I don't think I will ever necessarily come to believing in so-called Trinity, I do think that Jesus represents truth. And that's a good moral compass to follow without the blind obedience part, without the church over your head. And I do think that it's better to have Christianity than not, because most people require some sort of framework. There are so many people that actually love self-help books. I truly don't understand self-help books. I don't mean to be arrogant. It's just I read them and it's like, okay, this just sounds like common sense. What's the deal? Why is this book selling like crazy? Like, do people not know that if you make your bed in the morning, you will, not to knock on Jordan Peterson, of course. I like Jordan Peterson. How many times do you have to wake up in the morning and observe yourself, how you feel when you made your bed versus you didn't make your bed, to just be like, then, actually, I feel much better when I make my bed. I should probably make my bed. Anyway, completely off topic. There's a very clear, distinct difference, right? One can say, okay, I did all this research and I actually don't think Jesus is God. So then why would I be reading this book? I don't agree with that at all, actually, because even the Old Testament is really talking about the human condition. There's so much you can learn from the human condition as well as history. Granted, these are myths. These are not, there's a lot of real history intertwined in there, like dates and kings and certain elements, of course. But overall, it's just mythology, right? It's the mythological version of history. And on top of that, it's through the lens of specific group of people who have their own identity, their own agenda, right? So it's just really not universal if you think about it. These books, still give immense amount of value, and I do want to continue reading them because I can't wait to read some other parts about Abraham and Jacob, because there's so much there that makes you really understand history a lot better. It also gives you a lot of understanding how these other religions emerged, like Islam. I think it is definitely something that every both Christian, non-Christian should read. And instead of reading it like, okay, I'm reading it because I'm going to end up baptizing and believing that Jesus is God, or it's worthless otherwise. It's just, there gotta be a middle ground, a balance, as Jesus would probably teach, right? It's not worthless. It's immensely valuable. But it is okay also for you to take the value out of this book and not, I'm not going to say not believe in Jesus, because I believe in Jesus. I believe Jesus was a very wise teacher, and I hardcore really love what he was teaching. I've said it a million times. But I'm not going to believe the Catholic version of repeat after me or you're a heretic, because that's where we go wrong. That's where Christianity has been exploited. That's where Jesus' teachings have been exploited. That's how human beings constantly get exploited. And I know there's so many Christians who will just puff and scuff, or what is it, huff and scuff? I don't know the correct terminology. I shouldn't use words, I don't know. But anyway, they will likely just be like, that just simply means you're not a Christian. Okay, then, that's fine. I am Christian in essence. I am all about the teachings and trying to challenge myself as a human being. If that's not good enough, that's fine. I don't have to be considered Christians by your standards. Thankfully, only God can judge.